Good morning. Today I'm reading from My Voice Will Go With You by Sid Rosen. And is he has a section from Dr. Erickson's work called Overcoming Habitual Limitations. And in this section he has one small section that I would like to read regarding the Tarahumara Indians. I didn't say that exactly correctly. Spelled Tarahumara. And this group of Indians I learned about um, through another source, a family that had spent time in Chihuahua, Mexico, where these Indians live in a very deep canyon. And there's a history there. There's a lot of oil uh, company presence in that area. But the Tarahumara Indians, they are known for running, and they would run for supplies or to visit. I don't know all the reasons they would run, but they would run hundreds of miles barefoot without stopping. It just was what they did. They didn't think of anything big. They just did it. And to my understanding, they still do run hundreds of miles. The Tarahumara Indians of southwestern Chihuahua are the ones who can run hundreds of miles. He says 100 miles, but they've been clocked at more than that. Their pressure doesn't go up, blood pressure, and their heartbeat doesn't change. Some entrepreneur took some 100-mile runners to the Olympics in 1928 Amsterdam Olympics. They didn't even place. Why? Because they thought 25 miles was the warm-up part. They didn't try to run as if they were competing. It hadn't been explained to them that their run was only 25 miles long. Commentary. I sometimes think about that story when I'm having difficulty getting into a task, when I'm writing, repairing something around the house, frustrated by difficulties, or literally breathless from jogging. The phrase will come into my head, I am just warming up now. I usually find more energy available after this. Just a brief little reference. I put a link in the announcement for the students who watch this um, about these Indians. Next story is called Dry Beds. As in Sufi tales or Zen stories, the recipient of the knowledge of the healer must be in a state of readiness to receive. In many of those stories, the supplicant comes to the master but is refused entry until, quote, the vehicle is ready to receive the riches of the teaching. Erickson often accomplishes this preparation by causing the listener or the patient to wait a long time before he delivers his punchline. For example, when he presented the next tale to a group of students, he spent about 1/2 hour in building up to the final prescription. Some of this time was spent in outlining the background history. Some was spent in asking the listeners how they would treat such a patient. Some time was spent in telling other stories, not directly related to the problem. He repeated such phrases as, there is something that you know, but don't know that you know. When you know that what it is that you don't know you know, then you will be able to have a permanently dry bed. This type of puzzling and yet intriguing statement causes the listeners to do what Ernest Rossi has called an inner search. The listener is thus already beginning to search inside himself for resources that may help in the healing process. When we consider one of Erickson's induction techniques, the waiting technique, the same principle applies. The patient literally is left begging for more. Then he is ready to receive. He, ready to receive. A mother brought her 11-year-old daughter in to see me. As soon as I heard about her bedwetting, I sent the mother out of the room with the belief that the girl could tell me her story. The girl told me that she had a bladder infection in very early infancy, that she was treated by a urologist, and that the infection had persisted for 5 or 6 years, maybe longer. She had been cytoscoped regularly, hundreds of times, and eventually the focus of the infection was found in one kidney. That had been that had been removed, and she had been free of infections for about 4 years. She had been cytoscoped so many hundreds of times, and her bladder and sphincter were so stretched that she wet the bed every night as soon as her bladder relaxed in her sleep. During the day, she could forcibly control her bladder unless she laughed. The relaxation that goes with laughter caused her to wet her pants. Her parents thought she had had her kidney removed, that since she had had her kidney removed and had been free of the infection for several years, she ought to learn to control herself. She had three younger sisters who called her bad names and ridiculed her. All of the mothers knew that she wet her bed, and all of the school children, 2 or 3 thousand of them, knew that she was wetting her bed, and that she wet her pants when she laughed. So she was the butt of much ridicule. She was very tall, very pretty, blonde, with long hair that reached down to her waist. She was really a very charming girl. She was ostracized, ridiculed. More was demanded of her than she could produce. She had to endure the pity of neighbors and the ridicule of her sisters and the school children. She couldn't go to slumber parties or spend the night with relatives because of her bedwetting. I asked her if she had seen any other doctors. She said that she had seen a lot of them, had swallowed a barrel full of pills and a barrel full of medicine, and nothing helped. I told her that I was like all the other doctors. I couldn't help her either. But you already know something. You don't know that you know it. As soon as you find out what it is that you already know and don't know that you can begin having a dry bed. Then I told her, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. I want a very simple answer. Now, here's the question. If you were sitting in the bathroom, urinating, and a strange man poked his head in the doorway, what would you do? I'd freeze. That's right, you'd freeze and stop urinating. Now you know what you already knew, but didn't know that you already knew it. Namely, that you can stop urinating at any time for any stimulus you choose. You really don't need a strange man poking his head in the bathroom. Just the idea of it isn't enough. You'll stop, you'll freeze, and when he goes away, you will start urinating. Now, having a dry bed is a very difficult job. You might have your first dry bed in 2 weeks, and there has to be a lot of practice, starting and stopping. Some days you may forget to practice starting and stopping. Some days you may forget to practice starting and stopping. That's all right. Your body will be good to you. It will always give you further opportunities. And some days you may be too busy to practice starting and stopping, but that's all right. Your body will always give you opportunities to start and stop. It would surprise me very much if you had a permanently dry bed within 3 months. It would also surprise me if you didn't have a permanently dry bed within 6 months. And the first dry bed will be much easier than two dry beds in succession. And three beds in succession is much harder. And four dry beds in succession is still harder. After that, it gets easier. You can have five, six, seven, a whole week of dry beds. And then you can know that you have 1 week of dry beds and another week of dry beds. I took my time with the girl. I had nothing else to do. I spent an hour and a half with her and then dismissed her. About 2 weeks later, she brought in this present for me. The first present she had, the first present she had ever given with the knowledge that she had a dry bed. It was a knitted purple cow. I value the present. And 6 months later, she was staying overnight at friends and relatives at slumber parties in a hotel because it is the patient who does the therapy. I didn't think it was the family that needed therapy, even though the parents were impatient. The sisters called her bad names. The school children ridiculed her. My feeling was that her parents would have to adjust to dry beds. So would her sisters and the school children and the neighbors. In fact, I saw no other course for them. I didn't think it was necessary to explain anything to the father, the mother, the sisters, or anybody else. I had told her what she already knew, but didn't know that she knew. And all of you have grown up with the idea that when you empty your bladder, you empty it all the way. And you assume that. The important thing is that all of you have had experience of being interrupted and shutting off the stream of urine very suddenly. Everybody has that experience. And she had forgotten it. All I did was remind her of something she already knew, but didn't know she knew it. In other words, in doing therapy, you regard your patient as an individual, and no matter how much of a problem her bedwetting was to her parents, her sisters, neighbors, and school children, it was primarily her problem. And all she needed to know was something she already knew. And the therapy for all the others was letting them make their own adjustments. Psychotherapy should be an orientation to the patient and an orientation to the primary problem itself. And remember this, that all of us have our individual language. And that when you listen to a patient, you should listen knowing that he is speaking an alien language and that you should not try to understand in terms of your language. Understand the patient in her language. That's the end of that one. I'm going to do one more called the bolo tie. All of our life, we learn to place limits on so many things. I can think of Bill Falsey, a KOOL TV newsman. On a trip to Chicago, he went to a restaurant where the head waiter informed him that he would have to wear a tie. And not the bolo tie that Bill was wearing. Bill asked the head waiter, "What did you pay for your tie?" The waiter said very proudly, $25. And Bill said, "My tie cost $200. And Bill said the waiter didn't know what to think. And Bill Falsey walked into the restaurant and took a seat where he chose to sit, while the waiter tried to give that some thought. That odd looking thing that Bill Falsey had on, a $200 tie, while his was only a $25 one. So have a dream. And every time you dream, you have the right and the privilege of redreaming that dream with another cast of characters. And in that way, you can discover many things you've trained not to know. Your teachers a long time ago told you, quote, "Look at me when you're speaking to me. Look at me when I'm speaking to you." And you learned, don't do this and don't do that. Wear the right clothes, the right shoes, tie your shoes right. So much of our learning is based upon limited instructions that bar us from our own development of our understanding. And we get into patterns of being limited. I taught my sons how to hoe a potato patch by making designs. And all of the time they are making designs with their hoes and hoeing the potato patch, they are wondering what their last design will be. So my sons learned to hoe a potato patch by hoeing triangles and more triangles. And on their own, they discovered that they could hoe circles and numbers and letters. And it is wonderful to have a night's sleep, a sound and restful sleep, and not find out until next week that you have dreamed that night. You didn't know about that dream until a week later. Commentary. The comments that Erickson made after the tale of the bolo tie might seem to be irrelevant. Actually, they are his way of repeating and driving home the main points in this tale. The first point is that we tend to be limited in our patterns of understanding and action. The second point is that we can replace our limited and limiting instructions with new patterns of our own devising. Finally, Erickson frames his comments with the suggestion that the listener should discover new patterns in a dream. He should trust his unconscious mind to devise novel ways of overcoming habitual limitations. And that's three stories from overcoming habitual limitations. Thanks for listening. Hope that's helpful. Hope it's inspiring. Hope you will use that to bounce off of because you have the same creative spirit that runs your body and mind that Erickson has, like we all do. Thanks.